Alright, so one more little video about monetization. As stated in my last video about how freemium has changed the MMO space, where it starts to feel like the entire game is built around the store. And in the West, there's still a lot of people who dislike pay to win. They say that they don't pay to win, they hate pay to win. And it's gotten to the point where there's this fake prestige around being a free-to-play player in a pay-to-win game, which that results in people playing the game for longer and more than anybody ever should, but that's kind of beyond the topic here. But due to this prestige people have about free-to-play, there's a lot of people who like to lie about being free-to-play when they're absolutely paying to win. There have been extravagant claims about being free-to-play, which has resulted into people saying free-to-play, by the way, sarcastically about people who clearly have swiped. It has become a pretty big meme in the Lost Ark community, and I want to talk about my experience and effect with the situation of people who claim to be free-to-play who aren't. Now, for other experienced players, and especially those around people who do swipe, it is very easy to see when somebody makes false claims, because an actual hardcore player is going to understand what is realistically achievable, what is organically gained, and what is clearly artificial. So, for example, during the Day of Mine days, I knew 2 people who had accounts as progressed pretty much on par with mine. We had mains ready for hard mode 1-2, then we had alts ready for 1-2 normal, and all these characters had like level 7 to 9 gems. 9s were basically on the main skills. However, a couple weeks later, they started to get more characters ready for G3, then ready to hard, and then they started having their level 20 weapons go to level 25. All of their gems were starting to turn into level 10 gems. Characters who were now struggling to get to Day of Mine and do G3 were now overwhelmed by it, and then they started getting characters 7, 8, 9 that were ready to hit Day of Mine hard mode right off the bat. There were claims and screenshots of Esther Stone, but even that couldn't really cover all the costs that went into both of these accounts, as basically the value on their accounts, the gold sunk in it, has at least tripled in the time of like 2 months. It was a clear and obvious artificial gain in currency that they got on their account while still claiming to be free to play. I just got lucky on my hones for real. But you really can't get lucky when the gems, especially one of them plays a ton of Swift classes, so they're going to need a lot of damage gems. So it's not like they could have got a damage gem, sold it, and bought more cooldown gems, because they're going to need more damage gems than cooldown gems. And one thing led to another, and eventually one of them did actually snitch and say that they both were RMTing for months. It was extremely obvious, and pretty much everybody we both knew was well aware that it was going on. Now, these players had a static. However, this static was actually free to play. And so suddenly they super outgeared their static, and now they wanted to do the harder mode where the static couldn't get into. And this set a unachievable standard for those free to play players to try to keep up with their friends. However, with realistic free to play gains, you couldn't get up to those levels. This led to the static falling apart, and also one of them quitting just right out because they didn't want to pug. They wanted to play with their friends, but now their friends were too high level to play with them or want to play with them. Now, I want to say that this part here, that situation is actually part of the game design itself. Honing does exist to a degree so that the unlucky people do swipe up to get the final hones to keep up with their friends who got lucky. However, that game design did not account for the existence of RMT, of people getting, I don't know, at this point it's probably like 6 times the value per dollar when it comes to RMT versus paying through in the cash. Which leads to the scenario where it's not like a small gap to cover, it is a huge gap to cover, and it's just impossible to with even legit pay to win. Because now it's not like the people who are spending money are just at item level or a little bit above, they're boosting way above it and setting extremely high standards for the rest of the community, or in this situation, their friends, which, so-called friends, I guess you could say. As once they overgear them, they're suddenly not a static member anymore. Sorry kid, nothing personal. Now, taking this beyond the people I was aware of or knew, this also creates a false narrative for the entire community of what is actually achievable as free to play, as these people will always try to post their feeds as a quote-unquote free-to-play to other sources like Reddit, Discord, or whatever. And so for the newer and unknowing people who think this is normal because people say they're free-to-play, they're going to just hit reality really hard and really fast. They will start to think that maybe they're just unlucky, but in reality, it was just they didn't swipe their credit card. But again, I'm trailing off. But what I'm really just trying to say is this sets a unrealistic standard of what actually progressing through this game as free-to-play is like. And it's not only misleading to the players, but actually to the developers as well. As stated earlier, the value of RMT is absurd compared to actually swiping through the in-game shop. That is why everybody you know who swipes basically just RMTs. The one swiper I knew who used to buy cosmetics and resell them all the time now just switched to full-time RMTing because it was just so much more value for their dollar. And so what RMTing does is it takes the money that should go to the developers or intended to go to the developers, go to RMTers instead. So then suddenly the developers and publishers think, well, this progression must not be that bad. People aren't swiping and people are still getting up high in item level. They're still achieving everything we set in place. So depending on how much they want to milk you, that might be like, hey, maybe we have to make this actually harder since this is too easy for them. But it's clearly not. They're just RMTing it and they're not doing anything about the whole RMT scenario really. This also applies to people who bought Chaos, as this also sets a false standard on how much Chaos Dungeon people are actually running or not. And then again, developers and publishers are gonna be like, oh man, these people really love Chaos Dungeon. They're doing it on all their characters all the time. They really love this content. Now, when it comes to pay to win versus the West and East, a lot of people say, oh, it's a cultural difference. While I do think that does have a fair bit of weight to it, I also do think it's just a time difference. In 2002, 2003, I still think that MapleStory was the catalyst for this microtransaction pay to win kind of game. In the West, we were going from games like Ultima and Shadowbane to World of Warcraft in 2004. And from 2004 to 2010, World of Warcraft kept that momentum going up to Cataclysm, where then we started having the rocky relationship of, yeah, we'll just stop there. Not a Cata fan. But anyways, what I'm saying is, for all that time there, Blizzard really set the standard for the Western experience. You buy the game, you buy the sub, and then you just play the same game everybody else is. While yes, RMT still did exist, I'm talking about the actual game design itself. And World of Warcraft still continued to lead the genre in the West, and also Final Fantasy came around. Well, Final Fantasy 14 ARR. And because the Western community was so used to this kind of model, they rejected pay to win as long as they could. Meanwhile, most of these, they started to transition to this microtransaction freemium game. But over time, we are starting to slowly accept freemium as just part of the game design. And it's kind of easy to blame Blizzard a little bit for some of this, as they held the standard for like the non-freemium game and then turned into a premium game with freemium aspects, as now you have to buy the game, you have to buy the sub, and then also there's a ton of microtransactions you can buy. And now we're seeing people accept pay to win in terms of the disguise of pay for convenience. And honestly, I think that it's just a matter of time before the West sees pay to win just as casually as the East does. Eventually, all the boomers who started off playing the old games with subscription please aren't going to be playing MMOs. It really is just going to be the kids who started off with it being normalized to begin with. That is, as long as the genre still lasts and everybody doesn't transition to like mobile MMOs and gacha games, which we are seeing a huge rise in those games because of MMO design, but we've already yapped about that for an entire 15 minutes. The point is that Korea has just been in the pay-to-win space for a lot longer time than us because we are so invested into World of Warcraft and that kind of game for so long. But slowly and surely, they're breaking us down. Overall, being free-to-play in a pay-to-win game isn't the flex it once was. That is not saying it's bad to be free-to-play. It is absolutely possible to play all these games free-to-play. The problem really occurs when people have these false claims of being free-to-play when they're absolutely just swiping, as it is just really easy for your peers to see when natural gains are obtained. It's like going to the gym and somebody that you see that looks average becomes The Rock the next day. Clearly something happened, but there are people who will believe it. Those people are generally going to be newer players, but those types of games are normal and it should be expected. It creates a false standard, or more so a false expectation. It makes the people who experience the average experience feel like they're actually doing worse. And I think it does just actively harm the game. Overall, I think this cling to wanting to be free to play or trying to look like you're free to play is going to slowly go away. Because again, as a culture, we are slowly accepting pay to win. At the end of the day, if you want to be free to play, be free to play. If you want to swipe, then just swipe and just say it. If you can afford to swipe, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. At the end of the day, you put in the work somewhere else to get that money, well, hopefully. But if you're an actual free-to-play player, just try your best not to really be concerned about where everybody else is at. And I know in a game like Lost Ark that is very hard because all those other people are going to gatekeep you because you're clearly not on their level of progression. But at this point, that is just a part of the game and just the overall MMO industry. But yeah, that is my yap about free-to-play and fake free-to-play and MMOs. And that's really it. See ya.